Welcome to Natu Reads, an audio library of revolutionary texts. Scripting the Change. Selected writings of Anuradha Ghandy. When Maharastra burned for 4 days. On the night of 10 July 1977, unknown people placed a garland of chapals around a statue of Ambedkar at Rambai Ambedkar Colony, Ghatkopar, East Mumbai. This affront to Dalit self-respect, and the unprovoked police firing that followed, ignited a veritable inferno that engulfed not only entire Maharashtra, but singed many other parts of the country. Outbursts were particularly strong in neighboring Gujarat and Karnataka. In the flames of Dalit fury, not only were the fascist Shiv Sena and their partners burnt, but all those who sought to play with their sentiments, including not only the Congress opposition, but also their own corrupt leadership. The bootlicking, servile politics of the Dalit self-seeking leadership got a slap in the face, and was shown that self-respect can only be achieved not by begging for crumbs, but by fighting for one's rights. The events of 11 July that ignited the conflagration were only the last straw of pent-up anger and frustration which had been simmering for the last couple of years. The police firing. On the morning of 11 July, the garland of chapals was first noticed at 6:45 a.m. By 7:50 a.m., Inspector Kadam had given orders to fire. This swift action was in direct contrast to the inaction of the police 2 days earlier, when Shiv Sena leader Mohan Ravle and his gang of stormtroopers held a rail roko, obstructing the travel of lakhs of commuters during peak hours. Although the nearby Pantnagar police station was informed, no senior official bothered to come and immediately register complaint. On the contrary, the few police personnel present sought to remove the chapals with a stick, without even recording a panchanama. The police's callousness infuriated the crowd, which began gathering on the adjoining Eastern Express Highway with a view to stop traffic. With this, the police immediately arrived, together with a van of the Special Reserve Police, SRP, and began clearing the highway and removing the chapals off the statue. The people retaliated. But even before the condition deteriorated, a second SRP van arrived and began indiscriminate firing. Without any prior warning, without first using tear gas shells, without initially firing into the air, without using rubber bullets or water cannons, the police started firing. They fired above the waist. They fired to kill. Within 15 minutes, 10 people lay dead and 38 were injured, 15 of them seriously. This police action was not just to clear the roads, as most of those hit were in the bylanes of the slums. The bulk of the bodies were found around a small playground. Of those killed was a boy of 14. Most of those hit were bystanders, some received shots inside their houses, and even some women received bullet injuries. It was clearly a vicious, brutal attack, nowhere commensurate with the needs of clearing a Rasta Roko. The news of the massacre and the desecration of the statue spread like wildfire. Rasta Rokos and stone throwing erupted all over the city. Some railway lines were closed down. In Ramabinagar itself, instead of being cowed down by the firing, the retaliation became more intense, and a police chowki was burnt down. By evening, all of Bombay was aflame. Sensing the people's anger, the RPI gave the call for a Bombay Bund on 12 July and a Maharashtra Bund on 14 July. This call was supported by all the opposition parties, while the Shiv Sena BJP government was too terrified to oppose it. The Bund. Early morning on 12 July, all the buses, trains, etc. were made to ply as normal. But as the day progressed, over 100 buses were stoned, cars were smashed, railway lines blockaded, and Rastarokos dotted all the major roads and highways. By the afternoon, it was like a people's curfew. All roads were closed, trains came to a halt, police chowkis were attacked, and clusters of over 1,000 people were moving around attacking railway stations, Shiv Sena outposts, and government property. One such gathering even marched to Baltakari's house, which was defended by Sena hoodlums together with a force of the SRP and the Rapid Action Force. In all Dalit-dominated slums and colonies, not only the youth, but elderly women and young girls could be seen aggressively moving around, disrupting traffic. Even though the Maharastra Burned had been called for the 14th, violence flared up in nearly all the major towns of Maharashtra, bringing life to a grinding halt in 35 towns of the state. In Pune, a crowd of 5,000 smashed shops and buses and resorted to Rastarokos. In Vidarbha, till late evening, pitched battles were being fought between the Dalits and the police. Particularly violent were the actions in Nagpur, Amravati, and Akola. In Marathwada, violence erupted in Nanded, Purna, and Ichalkaranji, while all major towns observed bunds. In Kolhapur too, clashes occurred, and in Sholapur, Dalit youth, shouting slogans, Joshi Munde Dokune, Joshi and Munde are a pair of gundas, warned Manohar Joshi not to participate in the Pandapur Jatra, scheduled for 16 July. The government resorted to a massive show of strength by calling into action 75 companies of the SRP and also units of the Rapid Action Force. Curfew had been clamped in parts of Nagpur and Purna, and by the evening, 1,136 people were arrested and 5 more killed. One of the injured at Ramabenagar died. One was killed in police firing at Kurla, Mumbai, and 2 at Nagpur, while one local Dalit leader was killed by Shiv Sainiks at Kolhapur. Yet, on 13 July, the violence and bond activity continued unabated. In Nagpur division, 5 districts, spontaneous bunds were observed in 53 places for the second consecutive day. In Nagpur city, 5 police posts were attacked and 2 burnt down. In Bombay, major parts of the city remained closed. Rastarokos and Rail Rokos continued to paralyze both central and western railways. Again, on 14 July, the Maharashtra Burned was a near total success. Bombay, although officially exempted from the Bund, continued to witness sporadic violence, with the central and harbor lines closed and large parts of the city immobilized. Thane district particularly saw large-scale violence, with the chief minister's Kohinoor hotel becoming the target of Dalit fury. By the end of the 4th day, the toll had gone up to 16, with one more being killed at Wardha, and mass-scale arrests had resulted in 9,941 people being jailed. The funeral. On Sunday, 13 July, roughly 1 lakh people attended the funeral of the 11 Dalits killed at the Ramabe colony. Several platoons of the Rapid Action Force and the SRP were deployed along the funeral route. What was significant about this funeral was that no political leaders were to be seen, having already faced the wrath of the masses. Even the Dalit leaders who, as usual, tried to make their presence felt, were physically chased away. Particularly to face the wrath of the masses were the 2 chief Congress agents, Ramdas Athavle and R.S. Gave. Athavle was greeted by a shower of chapals, and while trying to flee, was caught and thoroughly thrashed. He was finally rescued by the police. R.S. Gave was also roughed up, but, pleading ill health, escaped. A tragic fate awaited the other Dalit leaders as well. Prakash Ambedkar, together with a number of bigwigs of the Dalit movement, bolted himself inside the house of a doctor, while the masses shouted anti-leadership slogans outside. This continued for hours, and even though a police jeep was called for and waited outside the doctor's house, the leaders were too afraid to come out. It was only after the funeral procession had begun that these leaders quietly slunk out through a back door into a waiting car. Beside Prakash Ambedkar, those who crept out included Namdev Dahasal, Avinash Mahitekar, Arjun Dangle, Pei Sangare, and Chandrakant Handore. Cause of the outburst. The Hindu chauvinist Sena BJP government has been particularly casteist and communalist in its attitude. After coming to power, it disbanded the Minorities Commission and withdrew all cases under the SC and ST Prevention of Atrocities Act. Then, the state government sought to segregate these sections by prescribing a different dress code, blue uniform, for the Dalit pupils, whereas white shirts and khaki shorts were prescribed for non-Dalit school children. This was withdrawn after protests. In January this year, they sought to ban Ambedkar's photos in the courts, by passing a ruling that only Gandhi and Shivaji's photos will be allowed. Again, this faced strong protests. Then again, no real action is ever taken on the numerous attacks on Dalits or the vandalization of Ambedkar's statues. The culprits eventually always get off scot-free, which encourages them to further action. For example, in January this year, the killing of Dalit youth sparked riots in Aurangabad, while, in March, the desecration of Ambedkar's statue in Ahmednagar district led to clashes, but nowhere have the culprits been brought to the book. Finally, since the government came to power, there has been a conscious slowing down of the filling up of reserved posts in the SC categories, and also the huge backlog is being systematically ignored. This, of course, is over and above the general bias against the SCs by the government and the state, in spite of the growing attacks on scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Crimes against Dalits and Adivasis in the country increased by as much as 89% in the 1992 to 1994 period. Yet in Maharashtra, of the 2,500 criminal cases filed by the SCs and STs every year, only 2.6% result in conviction. Added to this, the elitist new economic policies have enhanced unemployment. The ban on public sector employment and privatization have reduced the reservation policy to a joke, and the continuous attacks on slum dwellers, at the behest of the builders' lobby, have increased the all-around insecurity of the lives of the Dalits. Added to all this is the growing Hindu chauvinism, and, therefore, casteism, by the very state machinery itself. This trend was set by the very founding fathers of this country. The Constituent Assembly refused to include any clause for the safeguard of the SCs in the Constitution, one of the reasons for Ambedkar's resignation from the ministry. While Gandhi had this to say about the caste system, quote, Varnashram is inherent in human nature, and Hinduism has simply reduced it to a science, end quote. Moreover, politically, there is no visible force consistently fighting social oppression that can give confidence to the more educated Dalit masses in Maharashtra. This has resulted in an all-round frustration where the Dalits feel economically, socially, and politically cornered. The hope that the Dalits in Andhra Pradesh and Bihar have in the powerful revolutionary forces, with which they have aligned, is yet to inspire the Dalits of Maharashtra. Even on this occasion, the Sena BJP combine has acted in a most biased and casteist manner. By announcing 1 lakh rupees compensation, by the evening raised to 2 lakh rupees for those killed, and 25,000 rupees for the injured, the government sought to buy their way out for the butchery while, at the same time, totally supporting the police firing. They actively propagated the cock and bull story dished out by the police that the firing was necessary, as the people were supposedly about to set fire to 2 LPG tankers. The government is, in fact, doing its best to shield Inspector Kadam, who ordered the firing, the same Manohar Kadam who has twice been charged in the past with violations under the SC and ST Atrocities Act. Today, to fight on all these fronts, the Dalits need to organize themselves into a far more powerful revolutionary force rather than act through regular spontaneous outbursts, which are easily quelled by the organized might of the state. Role of the opposition parties. The Congress Party, which is shedding crocodile tears over the Dalit killings, is being led by one Chhagan Bhujbal, earlier in the Shiv Sena, who had led the attacks during the agitation on the Riddles in Hinduism issue in 1988. At that time, this man was at the forefront demanding a ban on Ambedkar's book Riddles in Hinduism. Not only that, Vasantrao Naik, the first CM of Maharashtra, was instrumental in the formation of the Shiv Sena, and successive chief ministers, from Vasant Dada Patil to Sharad Pawar, have actively encouraged the Shiv Sena. Also, the bureaucracy, the police, and the big businesses in Maharashtra, particularly Bombay, have been instrumental in its growth, all under Congress patronage. The Janata Dal saw Ram Vilas Paswan fly in and out of Bombay, making a few pious statements, but actually sharpening his swords, not to fight casteism, but to settle scores with his political adversary, Lalu Prasad Yadav. All he could think of was some stunt about the renaming of the Dadar station, which is, in fact, just copying the Shiv Sena's methods of gaining popularity. Their social justice slogan remained in the air, while the only concrete steps taken have been to implement Manmohan Singh's economic policies with even greater vigor than by its original proponents. The CPI Home Minister cut an even more pathetic figure. After making a special trip to Bombay, besides making contradictory statements in the parliament, he has shown unnecessary faith in Thackeray's assurances that such things will not be repeated. The CPM, as usual, has issued some strong statements and forgotten about the issue. Neither of these revisionist parties has ever considered fighting caste oppression as important to its policy. Finally, we have the so-called Dalit Party, the BSP, which has been the only party, except for the Hindu chauvinists, that has not even condemned the police firing. On the contrary, Mayavati threw the blame on the Dalits, and their lack of unity for all that happened in Bombay. With such friends to stab in the back, the Dalit movement does not really require any enemies. And with the various Dalit factions in Maharashtra running at the tail of one or the other major political formations, they have effectively reduced the Dalit organizations to a state of paralysis. In all the major Dalit movements in Maharashtra, since the Dalit Panther movement in 1973 to 74, these leaders have had little or no role to play. The militant Dalit Panther movement, the long-drawn-out Namantar movement, which saw fierce outbreaks in 1978 and again in 1994 for changing the name of Marathwada University to Ambedkar University, then again, the Maharashtra-wide protests against the banning of Ambedkar's book, Riddles in Hinduism, and now, in the present outburst, the Dalit leaders have never had any role to play. They never gave the protests an organized form. They never planned any resistance to the attacks of the fascists and/or police. They never mobilized their people or led them to fight, except for the Dalit Mukti Sena in the initial phase of the Namantar movement, and, in fact, left them to the spontaneity of the movement, thereby becoming easy targets of the Shiv Sena and the police. Even on this occasion, during the Bund, when the masses fought, the leaders roamed in cars with RPI flags flying under police protection. And that is why, on each occasion, even though the Dalit masses have fought heroically, the battles have been one-sided. The deaths, the injuries, and the arrests have all been of the Dalits, while the Shiv Sena and police go scot-free. Of course, the fascists have the backing of the state, but that only calls for more organization, more systematic planning, and the utilization of forms of struggle combined with the mass confrontations. Besides, it is a losing battle to continue the fight with stones and sticks against the armed gangs of the Shiv Sena and police. Dalit movement in Maharashtra at the crossroads. The Dalit movement in Maharashtra has become an important vote bank in state politics, and the various parliamentary formations seek only to utilize it for their electoral games. The Dalit leaders are no different. During the struggles, they are conspicuous by their absence. During elections, they appear on center stage, and that too as political pimps of some other party, selling votes for large packets of notes. Sometimes it is for the Janata Dal, at other times for the Congress, and now even for the openly casteist BJP. It is the upper-class Dalit elite who are primarily responsible for leading the Dalit masses into this suicidal anti-Dalit electoral politics. And in this, the BSP has proved to be the best manipulator and the most dangerously poisonous snake within the Dalit movement. It is the chief Trojan horse of the ruling classes, placed within the Dalit movement to divert their militancy into electoral channels. But in Maharashtra, despite the co-option of the leadership, militant struggles have again and again broken out, and now the Dalit movement is at a crossroads. Besides, the new economic policies are leading to a polarization within the Dalit community. On the one hand are the elites, well placed in the top echelons of the state, bureaucracy, and the establishment, and on the other hand are the masses of Dalits, mostly educated but unable to find decent employment. With even the limited reservations drying up, the new generation of Dalits face a bleak future. And with the growth of the Hindu chauvinist forces, their own security is getting even more fragile. They are being cornered from all sides. This polarization is reflected politically, with the established leadership representing the upper and middle strata of Dalits seeking compromise and adjustment with the ruling cliques, while the masses are left betrayed and leaderless. It is this sense of betrayal that burst out in anger during the funeral. But the agony of the Dalits cannot find answers within the framework of establishment politics. The movement is only going round and round in circles, whether the unity of self-seeking leaders, or a VP Singh or Ram Vilas Paswan, or a Kanshiram, or an Arun Gavli, or any of these hundreds of self-professed Dalit leaders who bask in the glory of ruling class payoffs, it makes little difference. None really attacks caste oppression at its roots. None stands for the smashing of the caste system, as all are merely interested in the electoral game, and the Dalit vote bank, and in filling their coffers. But if the Dalit movement is to break out of these shackles and advance, if it is to hit telling blows at the Shiv Sena-type Hindu fascists, if it is to confront the police more effectively, and, most important, if it is to achieve real self-respect and a decent life, it must come out of the confines of the politics of servility, the decadence of parliamentary semantics, and the importance of social reformism. The time has come to stop receiving blows, but rather to give them. The fascists are sharpening their swords, and so is the state. Hardly has the sound of the bullets died down when the Shiv Sena has begun rallying Hindu Dalits, taking out a Jatra from Kalaram Mandir, Nasik, with an aim of putting them against the Neo-Buddhists, who are the main force in the present Dalit movement. It is a new strategy to use Dalits to kill other Dalits. Each round of the battle needs to be followed by systematic organization and preparations for the next round. Ambedkar, in his time, was a social reformer whose activity, to some extent, contributed to the weakening of the caste system in Maharashtra. But his constitutionalism, his faith in achieving change within the framework of the system, and his reformism restricted the movement from developing further. No doubt, Ambedkar gave Dalits that self-respect which had been destroyed and mutilated by centuries of untouchability. But mere self-respect is not sufficient to fight that gigantic system on which casteism breeds and gains sustenance. If the Dalit movement is to advance, it must reject the limitations of Ambedkarism, reject the trammels of constitutionalism, nonviolence, sectarian politics, and electoral stultification, and must wield itself into a revolutionary force in order to achieve a bright new future. Already, in actual practice, each round of the Dalit movement in Maharashtra has gone further beyond the confines of Ambedkarism. The Dalit Panthers proclaimed Indian independence as fake, observed 15 August as Black Day, boycotted the by-elections, and openly called upon Dalits to retaliate caste oppression with violence. The Namantar movement spoke of a Dalit Liberation Army, a long march, and a violent struggle for achieving its aims. Further, in the Riddles agitation, as well as in the present upsurge, totally extra-constitutional methods and violent forms were adopted. However, after each spontaneous outburst, the movement has returned to being reined in by the ruling classes and their agents within the Dalit movement. Nonetheless, the present upsurge in the Dalit movement is not confined to Maharashtra alone. In Karnataka, over the last few months, there has been a spurt in the number of clashes, with feudal elements of the upper castes, Lingayats and Gaudas, taking an offensive against the Dalits, very often utilizing the backward caste elements in the clashes. But significantly, in all these areas, the Dalits have been fighting back. The most militant outbreaks have, in fact, taken place in Tamil Nadu. Here, feudal upper caste elements have ganged up with the DMK government and the police to launch massive attacks on the Dalits. Over the last year, a number of Dalits have been killed and hundreds are languishing in jail. Here, too, the Dalits have been continuously betrayed by the establishment parties, including the DMK and the AIA-DMK, and have now taken the initiative into their own hands. During the 6 August rally, organized by the Devendakula Velalar Federation, DVF, and supported by the Vanyars organization, the PMK, the police took into preventative custody 1 lakh Dalits, many of whom were local-level activists, disrupted rail traffic from the south, and detained 2,000 vehicles proceeding for the rally. Even the High Court, while granting permission, introduced such stringent conditions on the rally that the so-called freedom of assembly was made to look ridiculous. At the rally, where the police thrice outnumbered the procession, the leaders warned of a liberation struggle if the government does not set free, by 14 August, all the Dalits arrested over the past few months, under the National Security and the Gunda Act. Thus, while the Dalit masses have been fighting for their rights, the upper-class Dalit leadership and their parties have stayed aloof. The polarization within the community is deepening, the gap between the haves and the have-nots amongst them is widening, and the contradiction between the masses of Dalits and their leadership is sharpening. The Dalits are beginning to realize who their real friends are and who are their enemies. The time has come to throw off the shackles that tie them to this decadent system, to break free from the self-seeking leaders and march forward with a revolutionary confidence, to build a new social order free from exploitation, oppression, and the inhuman caste system.